Welcome to the latest episode of Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. I have a really good interview coming up with Steve Fort. He's a senior planner with Suzanne, Elledge Planning and Permitting Services. And we're going to talk about, guess what? Housing. We're going to talk about Santa Barbara County housing element with Cumbre Plaza. Before that, though, I just want to ask you to please take a moment to hit subscribe on YouTube. This is really important to me. The subscriber base is growing, and the more you can hit subscribe, the more subscribers I get, it means I can reach a larger amount of people and be able to expand the podcast. So please just take a moment. It's a quick thing. Then you'll get the podcast in your feed regularly, and you won't have to search for them or just hope they pop up when you're on YouTube. Also wanted to let you know about my new website, santabarbarapodcast.com. So this is an affiliate site, and it includes all my Santa Barbara Talks podcast and everything that is related to housing and business and education and culture and all the stuff that I talk about every week. I really appreciate your support. Take the time to hit subscribe. Visit santabarbarapodcast.com. Consider a contribution if you can. I am the sole owner of these podcasts, and I do them on my own time. As I'm recording this right now, it's a Sunday afternoon, and I'm doing it because I love it and I want to contribute to the community as much as possible, but by providing these really important, rich, dynamic conversations with community activists and leaders and individuals. So thanks a lot for your time. And here comes Steve Fort. Have a great day. Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's such a pleasure today to be here with Steve Fort, who is a senior planner with Suzanne Elledge Planning and Permitting Services. And Steve's got a great reputation around town. As we know, I cover City Hall and planning issues, and he's really somebody who knows his stuff. And so I'm honored to be able to have a few minutes today to talk with Steve about, guess what? Housing in Santa Barbara. Steve, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Glad to be here. I've seen a few of your episodes, previous episodes, and I kind of know how it goes on these, and always find them interesting to hear what people have to say about the topic, and then find out a little bit more about them, and looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate you watching, and let's dive right in, Steve. I've been writing a lot with my other hat at Newshawk about housing and the county housing element, and Santa Barbara with their housing element, and La Cumbre Plaza and AUDs, and just sort of all these issues that have been coming up, or I should say ADUs, accessory dwelling units, all these things that have been coming up. So let's talk, Steve, about the county's housing element. As we know, the county missed the deadline. No shame in that, apparently, because lots of counties and lots of jurisdictions have missed the deadline. Yeah. But there have been a lot of questions about some of the sites that are on their list for rezoning. And there's some concern from City of Goleta people and residents and neighbors. I get emails about, hey, you're primarily proposing on the South Coast anyway, Eastern Goleta Valley. And that's already an impact when Goleta's built a lot of the housing. And so this all is about the need for more housing in Santa Barbara. So we get all tangled because everybody has their own perspective on these things. Steve, what's your take on the housing element and sort of where we're at with this effort to meet state mandates to bring more housing to the county?
Well, I look at the county map, which is the hot topic, the different colors and the sites on the map. And frankly, I wasn't very surprised by by most of the sites that were indicated on the map, whether it's, that South Patterson area or, further out, Glen Annie, sites around Carp. I really wasn't that surprised. I'm familiar with some of the owners of those properties, and they've had some interest for years in exploring some different uses on some of those ag properties, and now it's kind of flipped around where the state and the county are kind of on board now and interested in listening to that conversation. But I wasn't really surprised. I mean, if we're not going to build out on Gaviota, and we're constrained by the ocean and the steep slopes and everything behind us here, on the South Coast anyway, we got to look somewhere, and we have to decide where this is going to be. Where are we going to put housing? We have limited space to function, and we're a city. We're a couple of cities along here, and it's got to go somewhere. And really, these are, it's tough to see sort of that legacy ag get targeted, but it's also can be considered it's infill, and we're not expanding down the coast, and we're not building up in the mountains. We need to find somewhere to do it. A lot of these, well, some of these sites, these ag sites, they're ag, they're greenhouse ag. They're not row crops. And they're running a business there, and sometimes it can be tough for folks to stay in the agricultural business for several generations. And I think there are some opportunities to work with them there, and certainly there are concerns about traffic and quality of life, and that's all it's all got to get worked out and be studied. And maybe there's some traffic improvements and things like that need to take place along with these rezones. But as long as we're going to continue to grow population economically, the state wants to see us building housing. And then there's the other factor of we need the housing here because of the freeway impacts and the traffic impacts. And now we're studying vehicle miles traveled when we approve projects through CEQA. So in some fashion, I think we have to sort of suck it up and get together and figure out where the housing is going to go. So again, I wasn't that surprised about where the sites are. In the back of my mind, someday maybe there's a little more equity. Some portions of the South Coast seem to evade these sites. Maybe I won't name names of certain communities, but I think maybe if certain parts, if there were more sites kind of spread out, maybe it might be easier for people to swallow. But I think maybe there's a little resentment that some portions of the South Coast don't really see this, don't really see these sites identified. But we're moving forward, and they've got their map. They're sending it off to HCD if they haven't yet, and I'm sure HCD is going to hear it from the adjacent communities like Carp and Goleta that are right on the boundary, and they're going to feel the effects of these rezones.
Yeah. Let me just go off of that and ask the absurd question, which is, we know that where should housing go, right? It should go where the people are. It should be near transit, and it should be near services. It should be near where people work, because we need to reduce commuting and the new term vehicle miles traveled. We know that. It's obvious. It's not some bold leadership statement, right? We knew that 20 years ago, and we know it now. But the absurd question is, and maybe you just sort of explain it. The answer is, why not Montecito? Why not? We have big properties there. We have space. Obviously, there's a credible amount of wealth. Is it as simple, Steve, as saying, because the people in Montecito would never have that, and the people in the Eastern Goleta Valley and the people who live near the Glen Annie Golf Club will just have to deal with it? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I know there's legal speak, and I know there's planner speak, and I know there's reasons, but to the person and the family who's at Tucker's Grove Park right now, celebrating a birthday party and barbecuing, I can guarantee you, they're like, why don't we put some of the housing somewhere else? Not that we don't want it here, but let's have more in these areas, right? So can you talk about that?
Well, I was kind of dancing around naming the community, but you cut to the chase there. I probably have to get into planner speak a little bit. That I know that they're looking for properties that can accommodate a certain density in these rezones.
Yeah.
And I think that's 20 units per acre. So they need to kind of hit that and have some bang for the buck that HCD will accept and deem feasible. Otherwise, I'm sure there's a bit of a political aspect to it. I don't think that staff is purposefully avoiding Montecito because they're being told to.
Mhm.
I think they're looking around for viable sites, and I think they're doing their best to kind of spread it around. Um, what I think that answer probably comes down to is they're just not seeing the big enough sites that could accommodate the density. Whether they could sharpen their pencil and there could be smaller type infill projects, or maybe, a couple more stories above Coast Village Road somewhere, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
There's a bit of coastal.
East Valley Road, maybe.
Yeah, could be. What was I going to say? A lot of, maybe not a lot, but a fair amount of Montecito is coastal zone. That can play into it.
That's going to delay the process. That's going to take longer, and then that's going to feed into those who say we need it now.
Well, if you're trying to rezone too, it doesn't just end at the board of supervisors. It's got to get ratified, approved by the Coastal Commission and staff in Ventura as well. So that's just another, who knows how long that'll take as well.
Yeah.
I get the sense too that, the Coastal Commission on a bigger scale almost prefers short-term rentals and low-cost visitor serving type things. It seems to me like they prioritize that over housing in the coastal zone. And I don't know if that's really the way ahead in the future. I mean, certainly we got to provide access to the coast for everybody to enjoy it, public land, public beaches. But I get a little concerned when they seem to be prioritizing short-term rentals and that access over, how about letting some people live here? Sure, it's the coast, it's special, it's a little different, but there could be some housing opportunities along in the coastal zone too that we could take advantage of.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The whole coastal commission factor as well is definitely complicates things.
And for high density, Montecito's road network probably isn't ideal. If you're talking about sites that are kind of tucked up into Montecito,
Right.
You probably talk yourself into a lot of reasons why it should be or why it shouldn't be there.
Sure.
But I guess my initial answer would be that the sites and the density that HCD is looking for may or may not be there in Montecito.
Yeah. So let me ask you about, let's go down to the other end of the South Coast. And there's been so much talk about the Glen Annie Golf Club being rezoned, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about access there. Now, obviously, that's big. There's several hundred units that could go there. But every time I've been to the Glen Annie Golf Club, it's like one little road to get there. So tell me a little bit about why the Glen Annie Golf Club site is such a ideal site for the rezone when we're talking about access and how people are going to get there. I don't know if you spend any time out there, but it's off Cathedral Oaks there, and it's one road, and they're going to have to create new roads and all of that.
Other than the space being there for houses, the access, I'm not sure how much more that what is it, Stork and Hollister and the interchange out there. It seems to me like that interchange is, at least I'm not out there that much, but I hear that it's pretty, it's backed up. There's traffic out on the freeway during the shopping, backed up down the ramp down the freeway.
Yeah.
So I don't see how you could, however many housing units would be proposed and were to successfully be developed there. I really don't know what sort of traffic improvements would be needed, but it sure seems like something. I don't know. What do? Do you enlarge that whole interchange, or you try and channel people down further to the Cathedral Oaks, or the further out there, whatever that
Winchester Canyon or
Winchester out that way? Yeah. It's all good questions. How do you deal with the traffic, no matter where we're talking about, even if it was South Patterson or over in Carp? Are we talking about significant changes to interchanges and to keep the levels of service. And although the level of service isn't quite the CEQA challenge it was, but you still got to sit there at the light and get through the light and not be backed up into the next intersection. And sure, there is a trend towards fewer cars and fewer parking, but if you're out there at Glen Annie, unless some major transit project comes along with it, you're driving unless you're taking some sort of new transit infrastructure that gets put in, or you have the best electric bike you can buy. You're kind of out there where you need to drive.
Yeah, and of course they'll always say, there's a bus route on Cathedral Oaks, but as we know, MTD dramatically cut back service. They have a driver shortage, and they've got fleet issues in terms of replacement. And so, it isn't as though we have a San Francisco or even, definitely LA style, commuter public transit system in this area, and I live out in Goleta, and I can tell you, like, it's dangerous at 5-6 o'clock because the historic Glen Annie exit, even though it's really long, it still backs out into the highway. And so people have to go all the way to the right. And if you're not paying attention, oh boy, pity you, if you're going to be in trouble. So, that's sort of interesting. I guess some of the other sites, the San Marcos Grower site, the Magnolia Shopping Center, those sites might be something that's a little bit more palatable in terms of the fact that you can access them a whole heck of a lot easier than the Glen Annie Golf Club. Let me ask you, the city of Goleta, council members Kasdan, Richards, even Mayor Perotti, they've been pretty fussy over this idea that they wanted to, at some point, include these sites in their sphere of influence, and went over to LAFCO and got denied and said, we want to make sure these are ag. And now they're saying, hey, look at the county is over here rezoning these ag lands. What do you think of that? I mean, does Goleta have a leg to stand on here, or is it just different times and the housing crisis is worse and it is what it is?
I'm not sure how much weight their comments are going to, I think it's going to come down to how much weight do their comments and concern have with HCD. And is HCG just kind of past the concerns of adjacent communities? I mean, whether that's right or wrong, I'm not sure how much weight HCD is going to give concerns of neighboring communities when they're already cramming this down our throat and giving us all these units, and they've become more strict about demonstrating the feasibility of these sites. I think if the county can demonstrate it's feasible for whatever reason, whatever criteria they have to follow for HCD, it might be tough for people to challenge that at that HCD level. But I think we're going to find out probably in the next however many months, or less than a year here. I think we're going to find out pretty quick.
As somebody who deals with people who want to process permits, okay, and work through the system, what do you hear mostly from property owners and homeowners? I imagine you maybe deal with ADU units as well. What do you hear? What are the frustrations for them when it comes to them wanting to build an ADU or duplex or housing? What do you hear is like some of the problem?
Kind of, I guess I would put it into a couple categories. One is, there can be a lot of minutia. If you're not following, say for an ADU, if you're not kind of going by the book, if you kind of go by the book, you can get through pretty quickly. But if you have something that's a little unique and doesn't quite follow that straight, ministerial path, there can be issues that all of a sudden your ADU needs to be studied for this or that, or and it can slow the process down. So people get frustrated when they're kind of caught up in the minutia of everything, whether that would be design guidelines or, having to be set back from a creek or an oak tree or something, all stuff that's meant well and that was vetted in public processes and adopted, after public meetings. All these policies and standards, were adopted through a public process with the community. So it wasn't done in secret over time. These things were adopted with public, approval, so to speak. But when people get caught up in minutia, and I would say time delays that can be a result of backlogs at whatever jurisdiction you're at, or staff turnover. We're having a lot of issues with certain departments right now just because of staff turnover, and permits are ready to issue, but it's taken a couple of weeks or a month to get them out the door, and it's taking, and it is getting better. And I don't want to point fingers because they're doing their best, but just sometimes it can be the time to get a plan check started, and then the time it takes for the plan check to get complete. And then on the back end, you'll be informed that your plan check is done, but it can be a few to several weeks before the permit goes out the door, just because of staffing and backlog and turnover. And that goes back to housing, because they're trying to hire people, and it's really tricky. Just very superficially, say they get someone from out of the area and they come and visit, or they get on the phone, they have an interview, and they look in the paper or wherever, check the real estate ads, and they're like, wait a minute, how much are you going to pay me? And how much is my housing going to cost? Yeah. It's tough for them to recruit. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot, I'm aware that there's even a fair amount of burnout in these departments. Workloads are heavy. And I'm not trying to make excuses, but it's just like everyone else. Turnover, retention, it can cause these delays that frustrate the people that we're working with to get through the process, and us. And you can only beat on someone so much, and play squeaky wheel so much when someone's just backlog and they got a stack of things to do on their desk, and you're in that queue somewhere. Right. So I would say sort of the minutia delays people get frustrated with, things that come out of the blue that they weren't expecting, whether it's a building code issue or whatever it might be, stuff like that, and just overall cost.
Yeah, you make a lot of really good points, that it's the real world, and it's like any organization, it's really tough to recruit and retain people. Yeah. You see that in so many different industries. I had a conversation and a story I did with an interview with Lisa Plowman, the planning director, and she talked about, for the county, and she talked about they've lost 30% of their planning staff since the housing element update started, and including some high level people there. Yeah. And so she said that's part of it. That's part of the problem. I want to talk a little about the city of Santa Barbara in a second, but you're somebody, you're an insider, you're in the know, you know this stuff better than the lay observer. How well do you think the county's done with this housing element process, in terms of public outreach, in terms of meeting deadlines, and getting to the point that we're at right now? And I know we don't want to beat up on them too much, because everybody's got challenges in their industry, but have they done a good job here? Or, do we as the public have sort of a right to sort of be like, wow, I can't believe this is happening right now in terms of where we're at in the process?
I think they've done as well as they can when they're dealt this hand from HCD. I went to their workshop back in, I think it was November, at the county building, and I thought they did a great job, and they were very frank about it. And I know some of those staff people, and I think they're doing as good a job as they can with the pressure from HCD and the pressure locally to get through it. I can't say, I don't know the details of like how they've put things together and whether it could have been done faster or whatever, to meet this deadline. I don't think there's really a concern there that, as you said, a lot of communities are missing these deadlines, and it's not just the county. but I think they've done a pretty good job. I mean, they've got to find sites, and they have to, you know, I think, like I said, I wasn't really surprised at the sites that they chose for the most part. It was kind of, if I would have guessed, I would have probably guessed a decent percentage of them. You know, I can't say that. I think they've done a good job. Like I said, I know some of those folks, and I thought they were frank and honest about, you know, we're not going to meet the deadline. There's going to be this builder's remedy opportunity here, and that's why they rush to get those objective design standards done, because they want to be ready in case this builder's remedy, or, you know, someone tries to invoke that. And it's not just the housing element. There's every session, Sacramento, there are different new laws coming through that if you meet these criteria, you can process a housing project this way. And if you meet these criteria, you can do it this way, that speed things up. And they got to be up to speed with all this, and ready for it. So it's coming at them fast. It's coming at all of us fast, but especially them. I think they're doing okay.
Yeah, definitely the missing piece we haven't discussed, and I'll just do 30 seconds on it, is the state has changed what they expect from these housing elements. They no longer just want a document that says that we could rezone these lands for housing and here's where they could be. They want to know that there's a strong likelihood that housing will actually go in those sites, that it's a real analysis, as opposed to, here are some areas that we could do it. And so in doing that, that has lengthened the amount of time that it takes for the county and every jurisdiction to actually work with these property owners to find legitimate sites. In other words, not just put it on paper and then put it off for a few more years. And so if you take that seriously, it does take a lot more time. Hey, Steve, last question on this with the housing element, and I guess in general housing, but water. So every time I write a story about housing, I get at least a couple of emails from people who say, how come nobody talks about water? How come, you know, we're in a drought? And obviously we got a big rain and Kachuma's just about full, but we're never going to be out of a drought. It's always going to be that way. What is the plan or answer to all this housing? How do we have enough water for all these units?
It's a good question. You know, some people would argue that in the big picture, housing isn't that big of a user of water as, say, like a grand or a larger ag type use. But it still has to come from somewhere. And I think it's just something we continually need to kind of build that portfolio, like it's the desal plant in downtown Santa Barbara. Over time, figuring out ways to maybe capture more stormwater or infiltrate more stormwater. But it's just something moving forward we just need to get better at. But the other side of it is all these new units are way more efficient than the house I'm living in these old houses, you know, that are using more water, the fixtures and the building code type things and the more modern irrigation, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's just something we have to continue to figure out, and whether it's technology, physical infrastructure improvements, it's not going away. And it certainly is a concern, but, you know, I think maybe we look at statewide, you know, where is our water going? And I'm not going to get on a Central Valley big ag, you know,
bring up the almonds. No.
Yeah. But, you know, maybe there's some efficiencies, you know, maybe we shouldn't be growing almonds or rice in the Central Valley. We could be using water in a different way. I'm not that well educated on all that, but I'm aware that, you know, there's a lot of water getting sucked up by certain agriculture that maybe statewide we could do a little better job of prioritizing how it gets used.
Yeah, definitely. We have to conserve, and Santa Barbara does a great job of conserving, but really there's only so much we can do when the problem is ag, and so that's one of the reasons that it contributes. But that local water thing, and I guess the future is what, wastewater to tap or whatever that term is
Yeah.
called. We're all going to have to become more comfortable with that because
Yeah.
science is there, and
Yep.
it is healthy and safe. So
Yep.
that
Treat
may
the
be,
water and put it back in the ground and let that kind of finish the treatment and then bring it back up again.
yeah. Hey, I want to shift gears, talk to you about City of Santa Barbara and La Cumbre Plaza. And there's this controversy related to a specific plan. City of Santa Barbara, Mayor Randy Rouse, the council, they want to create a specific plan for the whole plaza. And there's a project that was submitted under SB 330 by the Taylor family, Matthew and Jim Taylor. And
Yep.
nice, great individuals. They want to move fast though, as fast as they can. And they have a 685 unit project, and they hired Ben Romo to sort of work the situation behind the scenes. And there was this big SB CAG vote that you should say big. It's big now, but it wasn't big at the time because it was one of these like obscure, not a lot of journalists cover SBCAG. And so there's this vote, and they took off this funding for a specific plan for La Cumbre Plaza, $1.1 million, even though the two technical committees had recommended funding for it. And the committee and Supervisor Doss Williams, very strong comments about government planners and architects and design review boards, and this kind of odd comments, especially coming from Doss. And I can say that I know Doss well, just very strange. And Randy kind of got embarrassed at this meeting. Randy Rouse, he was the sole one who was like specific plan. And so we have this splintered system now, right? We have this city has to decide whether to pursue a specific plan and maybe get the Taylors on board, where the Taylors are like, let's get our project reviewed under SB 330. But at the core of this, Steve, is housing at La Cumbre Plaza, 685 units. Maybe there's another developer who owns the other sides that's going to come up with 400 or 500 units. Can we handle that? What's your vision idea for La Cumbre Plaza as we look at the need for more housing?
Well, I've been up in this upper state area since like 2006. We've been living up here, and I've kind of, I've been looking at that mall, and it's been pretty apparent to me that at some point it's going to get redeveloped. And I think it's ripe for redevelopment with housing. I would say I'd like to see something fun there also, along with the housing, whatever that might be, a little bit of, amenities for the community up here. So I'm resigned to the fact that there's going to be housing there. And I'm supportive of it actually too, that there's going to be housing there. I just want to make sure that it sort of becomes the, sort of a jewel on Upper State Street. And Upper State Street, kind of maybe gains a little vitality back. If there's more people living up here, maybe there's more people on the street, and there's, more opportunities for coffee shops and restaurants and fun stuff. That Brass Bear up above Gelson's had a soft opening a week ago, and they were just buried with people. So it seems to me that there's some pent-up demand for things to do in redevelopment up here. And I think, housing over there can help support that. And not only that, but we need the housing for sure. But I just hope it gets balanced, with sort of the interface with State Street. And certainly the traffic is a concern. State Street gets pretty bad up here now at certain times. So it's kind of another thing, kind of like we were saying with Glen Annie. What happens to that? What is it? La Cumbre Road and 101 intersection. What happens with that interchange, and how does that accommodate this traffic? And what happens with State Street? Is it bike lanes? It's still going to stay 2 lanes. There's a lot. Is there increased MTD service up and down State Street when La Cumbre Plaza gets developed? But I just want to, I support it. I just hope it can be a balanced approach where we get the housing, but it also kind of becomes sort of a revitalization of Upper State Street. And I know I see both sides of the story. I think it's right for a specific plan, that sort of planning effort, but I can also see the applicant's side of it, where, hey, there's this opportunity here with SB 30 or whatever they're processing it with. And we don't want to lose that opportunity. Right. And we're going to take advantage of it. Maybe my ultimate desire would be that they could, and I don't know if this is feasible, but maybe they could lock in the benefits of the SB 30 processing, whether that's minimizing hearings or the time frame involved. But if somehow they could lock in the benefits of SB 30, and maybe a specific plan kind of trails alongside of it or parallel with it somehow, because I think, and I don't know the details of what the Macy's lease is and how long Macy's will really be there and when they would actually start building their project. Yeah. But I'd love to be able to have the developer get what they want in some fashion, lock in sort of those benefits, but also have the whole site take advantage of a specific plan type process, or at least maybe their project is planned and designed so it kind of joins up with a specific plan for the rest of the site. But it is critical that it be designed fairly sensitively, and that it provides the housing units, but it also kind of makes things better on Upper State Street for everybody, and maybe has a trickle down that, hey, Upper State is now just as popular and fun as Mid and Lower State. I think that'd be great. I'd be all for that. But we will see. There's the height issue. Yeah. Which, I mean, if we're going to go a little higher than other places in the city, that seems like a ripe spot to do it. Mm-hmm. And I also wonder how tall that Macy's tower is right now. I have no idea, but right. I'm curious how tall that is. It seems like a ripe spot for it, maybe a little bit of height. But I'm sure that's going to be a battle. I know that's already kind of queuing up. They think it applies. The city thinks that the charter height limit applies, but the applicant doesn't. So we'll see where that goes. And I hope we can get for the sake of the applicant and for the sake of getting the housing and for the people in the neighborhood up here, I just hope we can get a good project out of it that isn't caught up in litigation about height or creek setbacks. And, let's look at this site and let it be a jewel on Upper State Street that we can all enjoy and be proud of. Because I think there's some pent-up demand for some redevelopment and some different things on Upper State Street than huge title company buildings and huge banks just plopped right on the corners. But, sure, they're providing jobs, but it just seems like some of this land could be used a little more constructively, or I don't know, more like a little bit of a community benefit when it's housing and sort of more, right on the main drag types of land uses, services and entertainment, that sort of stuff. Maybe a hardware store on Upper State. Wouldn't that be a mind-blowing concept?
Exactly. And isn't that the perfect scenario that we wish government leaders would figure out a way to do, which is have a specific plan and also allow the tailors to lock in some of the benefits of SB 330, because
I hope there's
everybody benefits that way. And it's too bad that they denied the city $1.1 million of money to start that process. But maybe they'll still get there in some other way. But I'll ask you, Steve, when was the last time you've been to Macy's?
It's been a while.
Been a while?
Not since my wife has. But believe me, I say it all the time, other than Macy's, there's really no, and I think there's a Banana Republic downtown, but where else am I going to go buy clothes? When I go to San Diego to visit my in-laws, it's like we plan on, okay, I need shoes, I need this, I need that. We take care of it down there. Or my wife will go to like Oxnard, Ventura for a day and go shopping down there.
Yeah, for even when we had stores, Oxnard and Ventura were the places to shop because you had so many
Yep.
different options. Uh, for sure. I think Macy's is the lease is supposed to expire in 2028, but
Okay.
I think the word on the street is that they're not going to make it that long. And
Yeah.
so the tailors want to be ready to go with a project once and as soon as they can. And these things take a long time. It isn't as though we're
Yeah.
going to see that development built, anytime soon. So especially 74 feet. I mean, give me a break.
Is that
That's
what they're proposing?
parts of it are 74 feet.
Okay.
And the charter says 60 feet unless a vote of the people. So I think unless they get together and be smart and work out a way to all work together within a specific plan, the litigation there is going to be, it's going to slow things down a lot longer than
Yeah.
anything else would, so
Yep.
we'll see how that goes. But there's even there's that people on the Sears side, they're going to come in with their own project too. So I've
Yeah.
reported in sometime in sort of June or something like that. Hey Steve, I want to ask you just big picture about the housing crisis, and we talked about this sort of new term that people are really measuring, which is vehicle miles traveled. How would you characterize how bad the situation is for everybody, except for the most extreme wealthy, to live in Santa Barbara on the South Coast?
Well, it's obviously pretty bad. And, we to get in, you have to be in pretty good financial shape, or you need some help if you want to try to buy a house. And then you need that ongoing, you need two people working full-time jobs and good jobs in order to continue to pay or rent from the bank as you might look at it. It's bad though. And it trickles down to everything, recruiting, the ability for some of our local firms out here, the more tech type firms out in Goleta to recruit people and stay viable here. And I think, we're going to protect the Gaviota Coast. We're going to protect this and that. We need to come to an agreement of, we need to facilitate infill development without it being fought tooth and nail every step of the way. And I'm aware of a few local housing projects that, there is some opposition to them, infill projects. And I don't want to get into details about it or who it was, but let's pick the right battles to fight and be a little more selective in the battles that we're fighting. And then, bigger picture, and maybe that's kind of like NIMBY reform. I don't know. But the bigger picture, statewide, we have to continue to try to look at, I think, CEQA reform. And then on the affordability side of it, I'll probably get killed for this, but I don't think Prop 13 is really helping things. The way that sort of has a funky effect on the housing market. I also would like to see a little bit more exploring of these multifamily projects that come online. What can we do for like local preference and make sure that these aren't weekend houses for somebody or weekend apartments, but how do we get that local preference type of thing? I mean, to some extent, new multifamily project, there's inclusion area that makes sure there's affordable units, and developers will tell you that impacts their ability to have these projects pencil out. But to some extent, as long as the people that are getting these apartments or condos, whatever it might be, probably apartments, that as long as they're full-time residents and they're working somewhere in the area, I almost don't care who it is or how much the units are going for, as long as it's someone that's working on the South Coast. And at least it's kind of churning, people moving up into these nicer units, churning through the housing supply. But I think we'd be best served somehow to just make sure that, I'm not sure the legal mechanisms or whether it's feasible, but any sort of local preference, local workers being able to be prioritized for these units. And I'm all for it. Like I said, as long as they're getting occupied by people who are living here and working here, I'm not sure I really care how much they're going for, because at least it's people who are here working, and they're not kind of fly in, drive in, weekenders that'll just take the apartment and let it sit there. And I'm not sure how much of that is happening,
Right.
but I certainly fear it for sure.
Yeah. Well, those are really smart, thoughtful considerations, and I think it's great that you're a planner, and you're sort of, constantly, I imagine, talking about that and those preferences, because I think that's what's all about is, how do we house the people who grew up here, be able to, they can afford to live here. Mm-hmm. And how do we make sure that they're not pushed out of their homes by tech workers from the Bay Area? Not that there's anything wrong with them, but I mean, the reality is that, it's better if people are local, in terms of they give back to the community and they're invested in this community. And it is true that escalator, you build housing and not all of it's affordable, but people move up and frees up stuff below. So it's very complicated, but I like how you framed it. Really, really thoughtful and considerate. Steve, let's shift gears a little bit. We kind of talked the housing thing a lot. You got that guitar in the background, and in my research into you're quite the musician, I understand. So can we talk a little bit about Steve the person, and maybe what brought you to Santa Barbara, and your side gig is this live music entertainer?
Yeah, I got here New Year's Day 2000. I spent that Millennium night or whatever in Flagstaff, and then drove here, but from upstate New York, central upstate New York, Finger Lakes, kind of all over. So I've been here 23 years. I started out with Tynan Group here in Santa Barbara when I moved out here. I worked for Ty Warner for a little bit during the renovations of San Ysidro Ranch. And then I went to SEPS, where I'm currently at, in 2008. And have loved working there with Suzanne and Laurel and Steve Welton, and just a great team of people there. Our work can be very, very stressful and not good news all the time. So it's very important that we have a really good group of people that are fun to work with and fun to hang around with and fun to party with. And so I really have been blessed to land there. And it's just a great place to work. Suzanne has created a great atmosphere and a great business there over the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do that. And when that's not occupying my brain and my time, I do play guitar, kind of taking a little break recently, but just acoustic guitar, through a PA, singer, songwriter stuff, or in a duo with another guy. And we'll play places like Cold Spring Tavern or Roy, the Press Room. Mm-hmm. Which is another land use, local land use scandal. What's going to happen to the Press Room?
Are you one of the
like
activists to save the Press Room after that two different proposed developments now, right?
I try to educate the people at the Press Room about what is going on. It's not the city, you get the knee jerk. What is the city thinking? How can they allow this? And I kind of have to say, well, it's private property, and there's, property rights, and someone's proposing a project. The city isn't proposing this project. So there's I try to do the education side of it and the reality side of it for the folks that just go ballistic about it. Yeah. And then,
so what kind of music do you do? Covers? Do you do originals?
Both. Yeah. Covers, probably rock covers, some country, Americana. And that's kind of what my originals are too. Yeah. It kind of depends on the gig, whether I'm playing original. If I'm playing in the duo with my friend Rob Taylor, we'll do covers. Yeah. Rock covers.
Okay. Do you have a favorite song you like to perform?
Not necessarily. We have some that I really like. We do a couple David Bowie songs that are fun. Nothing specific though. Yeah. I like playing my own songs. I usually do that when I'm solo.
Oh, cool.
Usually more at a place like Roy or somewhere like that, or it's a little more maybe quiet, or people are actually listening.
Uh-huh.
Maybe.
Uh-huh. So are you a musician? Did you take classes growing up, or is this something you found later in life?
I started taking guitar lessons in second or third grade.
Oh,
So I've
wow.
been playing for about, I don't know, 45, maybe a little more years. Um, I played a lot of gigs over the years in New York and here, and kind of getting to that point where getting old, but still doing it. But not necessarily looking for those gigs that start at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. I'm more the let's play at Cold Spring, start at 1:30,
Uh-huh.
or let's play at the afternoon at the press room, that sort of thing. The afternoon gigs are kind of where I'm at these days.
Yeah. And so you mentioned New York. Are you one of the New Yorkers who is contributing to Santa Barbara? I mean, did you grow up in New York, or where were you?
Upstate, yeah,
Okay.
the Finger Lakes area, and then I went to school over in Buffalo. We lived in Buffalo some of the time when I was growing up in the '70s, and before I moved out here, I was living in a small town north of Syracuse, right on the east end of Lake Ontario, called Sackett's Harbor. Beautiful little spot, but it could be very, very, very cold. So I've been enjoying the climate here for 23 years. And I think this might be the coldest winter I've had since I moved here. I could be wrong. I mean, relatively coldest, but it's been pretty chilly this winter for Santa Barbara.
Mhm.
But yeah,
And
enjoy
why
it.
Santa Barbara? Is it a weather thing, or
I
out here?
had a girlfriend at the time who had lived here, and I got offered a good job, and I took it
Yeah,
with Tynan Group.
right,
And I came out for an interview and kind of looked around and said, wow, they're going to offer me a job.
right,
I think I can make it work.
right. Yeah, it's usually that. It's usually a love or UCSB for a lot of people. Somehow find their way
Yep.
to Santa Barbara. And so,
There's definitely an adjustment, but
Mhm.
I think I've adjusted over 23 years.
And what attracted you to planning as a career? Your parents who were planners, or how
No,
did that appeal to you?
it kind of came from being interested in architecture and
Oh, mhm.
urban planning, that type of stuff, and just kind of working my way through school.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. I mean, planning is such a amazing career. It's so important and
yep,
meaningful. And right now, especially if you're a planner and you're having to deal with all these housing issues, it's a really challenging, but I imagine a really fulfilling time as well.
yep, yep.
Um, so you came to Santa Barbara in 2000. You spent Y2K in, what'd you say, Arizona? Is that what you said?
Flagstaff on the way
Flagstaff,
out, driving on the way out. Yeah.
Flagstaff, Arizona, and then you moved
And
here.
it snowed while we were there.
Really?
The first time I ever was in Arizona driving through, and it snowed 8 inches. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm in Arizona and there's 8 inches of snow.
And so in 2000, what would you say your take was on Santa Barbara? I mean, do you think we've changed a lot since then? Are we pretty much the same? What was your impression? People always talk about, wow, the downtown, the architecture, El Pueblo Viejo, and the courthouse,
Yeah.
and the mission. And were you struck by all that? And do you still feel
Yeah.
the same way today?
Well, obviously the beach, and it's beautiful, and that sort of golden sunshine I still can't get enough of. But I really liked the fact that State Street was vibrant year round, and there's people out walking around, a lot of different types of stores and music venues, definitely more so back then. But I really like just the vitality of State Street. And back then in New York, some cities have definitely kind of come around and kind of become more proud of what they have back there. But some downtowns were kind of forgotten back then, and it was nice to just come here and it's like, wow, it's vital. There's people out, nice architecture. And one thing I really noticed was that things like the sidewalk and the outdoor sort of furniture and amenities, they don't get beat up by the snow and the salt. So everything is kind of like cleaner and nicer and a little bit more just a little different atmosphere. doesn't get beat up by the snow in the winter. And I don't miss those slush piles in April, that sort of thing,
Right.
that you see at the end of the winter. But it was, kind of the built environment. And, I spent a lot of time going to places in California that I never would have gone to, whether it's Joshua Tree or Yosemite, San Francisco, Cambria. I can't get enough of like Cambria and that points north from Cambria. And I definitely took advantage of it. Going down to LA when I first moved here, I was kind of like a kid, hey, I'm going to go see this and drive by this and do that and rollerblade in Venice and check out the oddballs down there. And I definitely did all that and took advantage of it.
That's great. And since you brought up State Street, we might as well end on what do you think? You love it? Parklets, outdoor dining, let's make it good, keep cars closed forever, or hey, let's go back to the way we were. What do you think?
I like the walkability and not having cars. I kind of think that maybe part of it might or should open back up to cars. It is a long stretch, like some people will tell you. I kind of like the area up by the Granada up there, pedestrian, and then maybe another section down by Ortega and Macy's down there, maybe another section. I'd like to see that Macy's building get blown up and totally just start over with that behemoth that's on the corner there. That thing's got to go.
Right.
I think maybe there might be zones where it remains pedestrian. I like walking down the street, but that said, if it's going to be a high speed bike path, I'd rather just see it go back to cars then, because it's been very frustrating walking down the street and just having e-bikes buzz by you with no regard for like being a part of people just zipping around with no respect for anything else, looking at their phones, going 30 miles an hour. That got old real quick. So I would like to see a balance. I understand that there's going to be, and there probably should be bikes, but I'd like to see a balance in some sort of like, whether it's a separation of the bikes or just some control over the speed that people are. And I know I'm the old man yelling at the cloud there, that old meme, but there's got to be a little more thoughtfulness from the bike community, I think, and some education, because especially at first, it was just not that safe. You just hear that sound coming and then it whips by you, and it just kind of makes you uneasy. But I just hope whether it's housing or whatever kind of backfills into State Street, I can't wait for it to happen because I like it when it's vital. And I'm down there a lot for work. Our office is up on near Arriaga on State. So I walk down there quite a bit. And sometimes I have a really positive takeaway, and other times I'm like, man, it's grim. And there's people laying in storefronts, and that's a whole nother issue. But it can come back, and I'm confident it will. We just need to. There's good people that are working on it. Some of the best people in town are working on it, and I just hope it and think it will come back. Hopefully sooner rather than later, and hopefully it's fun. Not just a bike path, but there's places for people to gather, and music and entertainment and outdoor events, and maybe parades can squeeze in there too somehow.
Yeah, we need to have a day when Steve Ford, either solo or with his partner, is performing on the 500 block or the 1,000 block or wherever, where we have that like sort of live music, and we don't have to worry about looking for the bikes as we're walking down the street.
And I hope it's also that it ends up that local people will enjoy it and come back, whether it's the types of businesses or the configuration of what State Street ends up being. You hear people say, I never go down the State Street. I haven't been down there in 10 years. That stinks. That's too bad. I want to, it should be for locals too, and not just tourists and TikTok videos. And
great conversation, really brilliant planning mind. It's my pleasure to be able to talk to you and hear you talk about these issues in such a smart way, but also such a thoughtful, kind way that sort of sees these from all perspectives, from the developer, the property owner, as well as a tenant and a resident, but as well as government, and being able to thread all those in a positive way is a great skill. So I really appreciate your time, Steve. And
Yeah, thanks for having me.